but how Franklin saw himself, and more importantly, how he wished others to see him.
Benjamin Franklin was the first great publicist and image maker in America, and the greatest image he created was of himself.
And I think that Franklin is a master of masks. Franklin understood that American life is one great masquerade ball.
Benjamin Franklin arrived at the party in January of 1706. He was born in a modest home in Boston, Massachusetts, the 10th boy of 17 children. By the age of 16, Ben was already showing a genius for subterfuge. An apprentice printer, he was indentured to his brother James, publisher of a newspaper called the New England Courant.
He wants to write for his brother's newspaper, but his brother's an older brother and, sort of jealous. So James Franklin is having none of that. So Benjamin Franklin has to disguise his handwriting and slip these essays under the door under a pseudonym. And here's a kid who's never left Boston, writing as if he's a widowed older woman from the countryside named Silence Dogood.
He's adopted the persona of this middle-aged woman, and he's able to carry it off so convincingly that it fools his own brother.
I have now remained in a state of widowhood for several years, wrote Mrs. Dogood, a state I never much admired. I could be persuaded to marry again, provided I was sure of a good-humored, sober, agreeable companion, but one even with these few good qualities being hard to find, I have lately relinquished all thoughts of that nature. The public was delighted with Silence Dogood. James, however, was not amused when he learned her true identity. In the end, Ben ran away from his apprenticeship, his family, and Boston. He ended up in Philadelphia.
Benjamin Franklin was a runaway. He was a fugitive from his apprenticeship, which made him a fugitive from justice. And Philadelphia was a place that took in people like that and allowed them to find a niche and to flourish.
At the time of his arrival, Franklin does not exactly exude an aura of success. He's 17 years old. He has no job, no prospects, and just enough money to buy a few rolls of bread. It happens that he strolls past the home of a young woman named Debbie Reed, who is destined to be his wife.
And according to the story that he tells,
I know Debbie Reed.
she was standing in the door of her father's house.
She was a sexy Pyro Bay girl.
Rather scruffy-looking character walks past
She was a bit
with
scruffy.
his dirty linen hanging out of his pockets and munching on a couple of rolls, which is all he had money to buy for breakfast.
Franklin described the scene in his autobiography. She, standing at the door, saw me and thought I made, as I certainly did, a most awkward, ridiculous appearance. It is difficult to imagine George Washington or Thomas Jefferson portraying themselves in such an inglorious farce.
He's very self-aware, very introspective, but he finds himself amusing in a way. And you can see the old man writing the autobiography and being amused by his younger self. So it's a very funny guy who's looking at himself and laughing part of the time.
There was plenty to laugh about. For 7 years, Ben knocked around Philadelphia and London, working as a journeyman printer and getting in and out of scrapes. He feuds with an overbearing employer, makes a play for his best friend's girl, and gets stiffed on a few sizable but ill-considered loans.
His endless brushes with human nature through the first section of the autobiography. That is one long account of America's first juvenile delinquent. And he scams other people scam him, and out of all of this, he comes away with a very considerable appreciation of what you can expect from others and a very considerable self-knowledge.
It is during these early years that we first encounter Ben's enduring enthusiasm for the company of women.
You know, we often think of Benjamin Franklin as this doddering old sage, But when he was a young tradesman in Philadelphia, he was, quite a good-looking guy. He was 6 feet tall. He was a great swimmer. He lifted weights. He loved dumbbells. He was, had a big, broad chest. Women, fell in love with him all the time. So he was a great hunk back then when he was in Philadelphia.
By his own testimony in his autobiography, Franklin had a lively libido. And before he was married, he consorted with what he called low women. He was evidently engaged with prostitutes.
Ben put it this way: that hard-to-be-governed passion of youth hurried me frequently into intrigues with low women, which were attended with some expense and a continual risk to my health.
And he reports to us that it's a stone miracle that he didn't come down with syphilis or some other venereal disease.
Oh,
He didn't recommend it to people, but on the other hand,
must have been a
he
dirty
didn't
bugger, eh?
especially condemn it in himself. He recognized it was part of
Benjamin
human
Franklin
nature.
was a dirty
It's
bugger.
human nature.
Franklin was all too familiar with his nature, both strengths and weaknesses. During those first years in Philadelphia, he had embarked on a quest for what he called moral perfection.
He compiles from his reading a list of what he accepts to be 12 common virtues: modesty, frugality, industry, moderation, temperance, chastity. And then he defines each of these terms and sets for himself the task of conquering each one in the course of a week.
He even makes a chart where he lists them all and marks how well he does, and it's industry and frugality and all these virtues.
I think he was hopeful that he could be incrementally better, that it wouldn't do any harm to have a little bit of a run at modesty. It wouldn't do any harm to have a little bit of a run at temperance. He never says, lay off the sauce. He always says, less.
In his autobiography, Ben admits with some bemusement that the project was probably doomed from the start. While my attention was taken up in guarding against one fault, I was often surprised by another. Habit took advantage of inattention. Inclination was sometimes too strong for reason.
When he finally gave up on the whole scheme, he realized that if he had become morally perfect, he would have sinned against the last item on the list, humility, because he would have been too full of himself, having achieved perfection.
And as Franklin himself puts it, and this really tells us everything we need to know about Franklin the self-improver, I could not boast of having accomplished humility, but I have made a good stab at putting up appearances.